But even assuming we're talking about the New York or federal WARN Acts, the the important where in determining whether notices need to be given is always a single site of employment. While the number of employees that the business enterprise has on the state or national level is relevant to coverage in the first place as to whether the statute applies, determining whether there is a mass layoff or plant closing is based on a single site of employment. Not to say the same employer couldn't be making um, enough employment losses at two different sites to where they would have separate WARN notice obligations, but they would measure each separately in most cases. And I say in most cases, here's some nuances. So it's either a single location, which makes life easy, or a group of contiguous locations. So this would be, for example, if you have offices throughout an office park, but say there's a couple buildings and not all of your employees work in the same building. Possibly even, a situation where you have an office on one side of the street and a warehouse or production facility on the other side of the street. Some of those types of things are going to still qualify as a single site of employment in most cases, even though it's not the same physical building. We're not going to get hung up on nuances as to, well, if we have an underground tunnel that connects these two buildings, is it a single site of employment versus if you have to walk outside to get from one to the next. If they're that close together, they're probably going to qualify as a single site of employment. If you have multiple locations that are further apart, they could still be considered a single site of employment if they are in a reasonable geographic proximity, used for the same purpose, and share the same staff or equipment. It's pretty rare to have such geographically separate but proximate locations considered a single site of employment. You really would need to have staff interchange or equipment interchange. Um, I guess an example might be if you had transportation company and you had drivers in two different locations, a couple blocks apart, and the drivers could report to either or both locations on a given day to pick up a new truck with a different load or something like that. The logistics are the same over the two operations, then maybe that would be a scenario where you'd look at the two sites versus each of them separately. I mean, really in that situation, you might have a hard time figuring out who to count if the same employees really work more or less evenly at the same at each of multiple locations. A couple other notes real quick. The same building could be multiple sites, multiple single sites of employment if independent employers operate there. So if you have an office building, each different company operating within the same building, would have its own single site of employment. It's not just that you count all the employees in the building. That should be fairly obvious. Maybe slightly less obvious would be if you did have a factory where you brought in enough workers from another company that did, say, special finishing on some product that your company prepares. I mean, it's possible that at some point you would actually have two employers having their employees work together within the same building, but there still could be two separate single sites, really based on the fact that there are separate employers. And the single site of employment for employees who work remotely is either and or the site to which they are assigned, from which their work is assigned, or to which they report. I'm sure there could be scenarios where not all of those things line up together to where it gets complicated to determine which site someone should be counted at. But, generally speaking, if someone works from their home but goes into the same office once a week and gets their assignments from that office, etc., then the office is likely to be considered their single site of employment, not their personal home. So you don't get to exclude them just because they usually telecommute.